Well, hello! In this video, we're going to be learning about something very important to web design, and that's how to create a layout for your website, and more importantly, how to put it into a grid, because all websites actually exist within a grid layout. And we want to be able to make our own grids, because right now, the way we do it, everything stacks on top of each other. Like this website, right? We just got box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, box 5, box 6, and they just stack one on top of the other. Boring. Our job is to make it so we have something that looks like this by the end. You see this nice layout? Looks beautiful, right? So how do we get this to look like this? Well, the answer is CSS grid. All right, well, the first thing to start off with is this. To make a grid, you first have to figure out how many rows and how many columns you want to be part of your grid. Now, in this one right here, it might be hard to see, but really what's going on here is that we need 4 columns. So if you look here, it might be tough, but you can see that this right here is a column, right? Here's our first column. So this is column 1. Now from here to here, that would be our second column. So this is column 2. From here to here, that's our third column. That's column 3. And from here to here, that's our fourth column. So that's column 4. So maybe some of these overlap many columns, but there are 4 columns here. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 columns. All right. Now the other thing that we have to understand is that we have all of these things called divs. Now divs in HTML are just boxes that you put content inside of. And you'll see all of these boxes are just in divs, right? So I have box 1, that's my first div, box 2, that's my second div, right? So these are just boxes to put content in. So each one of these, that's a div. Also, you'll see that they're all inside of this thing called a container. A container is where you put all of your boxes, and that's really your overall grid. So this is all contained. If you went all the way around, this is your overarching container, and that is the grid that you put all the boxes inside of. So what we're going to do is start by creating our grid with the container. So I'm going to come over here and go here, and I'm going to say hashtag container. And there's 4 commands that you need. Container, did I spell that right? I think so. So there's 4 rules that you have to put in to start using a grid. The first one is you write display grid. Okay? Now that makes it so the CSS knows it's a grid. Sometimes people don't use grids. This lets them know, I want to use a grid. Now if you press play, nothing happened. It's because you haven't said how many rows and how many columns you want. The next thing is to define how many columns you want. So I'm going to say grid template columns. Now this is the template for your grid, right? So what's everything fitting into? Now we said we want 4 columns for this. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to say 1FR, 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 1FR. Now that FR means fractions. So you see how each column is 1FR? That means each one is an equal 1 fraction of the whole screen. All right, so this should change things a bit. So now if I press play, let's see what happens. You'll see it's arranged itself into 4 columns. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I want to set up my rows. So here you'll see I have these rows, right? And if you looked at it, you'd see I have 1, 2, 3 rows. So I'm going to say grid template rows. And for this one, you say how many pixels you want your rows to be. Now in this case, it's about 200 pixels. So I'm going to say 200 pixels, 200 pixels, 200 pixels. See how I do it 3 times? That means I'm setting up 3 rows. Okay, let's check it out. Good. See, now these are a little bit bigger. And then finally, I just have to make a little gap. Because if you look, you see how there's like these gaps in between all the columns and rows? Yeah, that looks good. So we're going to say grid gap, and we're going to say 10 pixels. And that will make it look a little bit nicer. So there we are, we're set up. Now the next part is we have to see, you see that some of these actually span multiple columns. So box 1 over here, if you look at it, it actually spans over 2 columns. So does box 2. Well, how do we make that happen? You have to understand something called tracks. So here's what tracks are. Now, I just want to say these are the same thing. Okay, see, like here is the same thing as this. It's just a little bit more stretched out. So if I went like that, maybe it would look better. Now, the way it works is that a track is these like kind of empty spaces between the columns. All right, and those really are the positions we're going to use to define like where our each box is going to start and where each one's going to end. So you have to understand this and able to do this next skill. So over here, all the way to the left, right, that is called track 1. That all the way to the left one. The second column one, that's going to be your track 2, track 3, track 4, track 5. All right, so this grid will always have 5 tracks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has 4 columns, right? But it has 5 tracks. Those are the in-betweens and sides. Now let's say I want to get box 1 to go from here to here. What I would basically say is I want it to go from track 1 to track 3. The way you would code that is you'd come over here and say hashtag box 1. The reason I said hashtag box 1 is because if you look at the index, you'll see here, the ID of this is box 1. I would say grid column, and what I would just do is 1/3, which just means the column should start at 1 and go to track 3. And look what happens. Boom. Now the same thing goes for the second one, right? So if you look at our goal here, we want to go from here to here. So remember, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, okay? So we want to start at 3, and then go to 4, and then 5, okay? So let's try coding that now. Oh, where's my code? Oh yeah, it's over here. So I'm going to say hashtag box 2, because that's the other one, and I'll say grid column, and just to remind you, remember, it starts at 3, right? This is the third one, 1, 2, 3, and it ends at 4, 5. So 3/5. Let's see how that looks. All right, looking good, right? Let's keep rocking. So the next one is box 3. Now box 3 is a little bit more tricky than the other ones, because if you look at it, it actually only goes 1 column, but it goes 2 rows. So I don't really need to change the column because it already takes up naturally 1, but I do need to adjust the rows. So remember, it starts at 1, right? 2, 3, 4. So I want box 3 to start at 2, row 2, and I want it to go from 2, 3 to 4. So it goes from 2 to 4. So I'd come back here and I would say grid row, start at 2, and then go to 4. And check out what happens. See how it goes all the way down? Beautiful. Now, our next one is box 4. It's going to go from here to here. So once again, let's just count it out. So it doesn't start at 1, it starts at 2. And then it goes 3, 4, 5. So it goes from 2 to 5. So I'll say this, hashtag box 4. We're going from 2/5. Let's see how that, oh, come on, Seagull. Grid column 2, 5. So it goes from 2 to 5. Beautiful, it's looking good. And then finally, let's just look at this last one. I gotta get box 5. Box 5 doesn't start at 1, it starts at 2, 3, and 4. All right, so let's do this ourselves. Box 5, it goes from grid column. You might remember it starts at 2 and it goes all the way to 4. And now this and this look pretty much the same, right? So I'll pop it out, let's zoom in a little. You can see it's looking pretty good. So that's it. That's all you need to learn for this one. Now remember, there's 2 steps. So let's go back to it. I just want to do a quick review with you guys. The first thing is you have to set up your grid in the container, right? These 4 lines are always needed. You got to say display as grid, right? Grid template columns, you define how many columns you want. Grid template rows, you say how many rows you want. Columns are in FR, rows will be in pixels, and then you give it a grid gap. Once you've defined what your actual grid is going to be, the rows, columns, and gap, then you could start saying where do you want things to start and stop. Grid column and grid row. And then you get these beautiful, beautiful designs. All right, well that's it for this lesson. Hopefully it was a little helpful and you coded along with me, and then now you can move on to the lab. Good luck.